Japanese history will immediately be able to appreciate the worth of what we've accomplished here. However, in order for it to reach more people, which is a desired thing, I think you want to be able to talk to people who are working in modern Japan, or in very early Japan, or perhaps not in Japan at all, or who are not historians. I think that how the potential impact of the book is going to depend a lot on how you frame this. And right now, as many of us have pointed out to you, it's operating in, you have a lot of nitty-gritty detail in this book, and the kind of diagrams that you showed us this morning are quite helpful. But it would also be helpful to have a frame. So I know that you're not going to be able to respond 100% right now on the spot, but just to perhaps get started, would you comment a little bit on how you would, for example, position yourself with respect to other scholarship on this period of history, whether in English or Japanese or anything else? How do you see your contribution? Is this a hole that you're filling, or is there some argument out there that you're correcting, or is it an answer to a question that has not been answered, or none of the above, or some of both? How would you position it? Tell us why you think this is important. What is your contribution to the study of 15th century Japanese history?
So, possibly appropriately for the topic, it's not so much a hole that I think I'm filling as it is a link that I think I'm creating. In that so one of my, this will probably be familiar to anyone who does Chinese history as well. One of my gripes is that frequently we look at the people who are considered the pinnacle of establishment or creation, and the decline after that is often kind of taken for granted as inevitable. That there's kind of these individual epic personalities, and then there's all the little people, and then the opposite of that in Japanese history is institutional history. That we have this incredibly rich history of institutions and institution building and ways that institutions function. And the problem with Muromachi history is that institutional history doesn't work in Muromachi history because it literally changes based on the individuals. And this leads to a situation where even someone who sets out to write institutional history, probably I relied quite heavily on and really respect Grossberg's work, but he clearly set out to write institutional history, and yet in order to make it work, had to literally combine it with a Ashikaga shogun narrative, where it's like, this is what this Ashikaga shogun did, this is what he did, this is what he did, and then now that I've given you what each of these individuals did, I'm going to tell you about the institutions, except that none of these institutions are actually stable entities because they all changed based on what these previous people did. So institutional history tends to create a massive mess when trying to talk about the Muromachi period, but that doesn't mean that they didn't have an impact. They did have an impact. They had huge impact. And so what I'm trying to do is basically bridge that, write about individuals, write about institutions, those two streams by talking about how individual individuals can be institutions without being the heroes of individual stories. I think I've joked to a fair number of people in the room that this is a story about picking up the pieces after Yoshimitsu. And in some ways it is that, in some ways that puts Yoshimitsu too much at the center of what I want to do. But it is about basically ordinary people who, as individuals, have a huge impact because of the way that the institutional structures are working at this moment, and that's the linkage that I want to make.